All right then, let's go ahead and get some action going on screen. In the browser window from our efforts within the JavaScript, the frontend.js file. So here's that. It's not really doing anything right now. But what we'd like it to do is to render some components, or even just place some text initially on the within the block, which is to say within the DOM, the document object model of the page. And our strategy for doing that is going to start actually not in this file, but in Parthenon PHP. And our strategy here is going to be to kind of leave ourselves a little place to find again later and replace. So all I'm going to do is just put in a div, and it's going to be empty. And the only thing special about it is that I'm going to give it a class name. I'm not in JSX, so I use the actual term class, not class name. I'm going to call it PZ target div. So that's not going to appear on screen, but it's going to be there, and it will be findable. So over here in index.js, in frontend.js, I can find it. So it'll be like const div equals document query selector. Got to tell it what the selector is, and it's a class. Got to use the dot here, and the class is PZ target div. And I'll just note in passing that I'm kind of taking a little shortcut here, because there could be more than one instance of the block, so this would only find the first one. So if we were going to do this a little more formally or effectively, or production readily, we would want to do query selector all and get back an object, and we would then take that and use the for each method to move through each element. But I'm just kind of keeping it simpler than that. And so now I can think about, just to show that we're on the right track here, I can set inner HTML to something. Right, so there's a little string of text, and I don't currently have npm run start running, so I'm going to do that, and that will cause the change I just made here to be translated and propagated over to build, such that we can change back over to our front page and reload that. There's my JavaScript alert, and there, hi, from within the front end file, right? So that found the div and wrote into it. And so we should just take that the next step, which is, rather than just changing the contents of this inner HTML, we can think about instead using React DOM.render, and that takes two parameters. The first is a component to render, and we'll call it my component, which I just made up. and it's React, so it's got to be self-closing. So there's that. And then the next parameter is simply the element that we want to write into. Now I used div there. It's not like an it's not the actual HTML tag. It's a variable, and let me just make that more clear, right? I couldn't call that anything. I called it div because that is what it is. Okay, now the only problem here is that my component is like a made-up component. So I'm allowed to do that in React, of course. That's kind of the point. But I do have to go ahead and fill in what this thing is. So I'm making a function. And now within that function, I can return stuff. And indeed, I can return more than one element or component, and so I'm going to do that. So what I'm returning here is actually JSX, and that means a couple of things. First of all, it means that everything that I return has to fit within one element. So I'm just wrapping it in a div, which is a typical way of dealing with that. And then I can put whatever I want in here. And I'm going to put in one text control with a label just so I can find it. Enter frontend text, we'll say. And that's got to be self-closing. And just for kicks, let's do something else. Right, date picker. So that's all good. The only problem here is that these two components do exist, but I do need to bring them into play. So I'm going to import them. Import text control and date picker. From WordPress components, which is the package name for that. You remember we set up a dependency for WP components, which is like the internal name for that. We're talking about the same thing, so that's what brings or makes available all the various components that WordPress provides in this context. Okay, so that's everything there. I'm going to save it. You'll see it recompile there, and we can see whether we got anywhere with that. So there, right? The div so far it's in there, but it's not visible, and that's because it hasn't rendered yet. I mean, the DOM hasn't been displayed yet, but now it has. And you can see there's my text control, right? And here's my date picker, which I feel like you can get a lot of stuff on screen and working and looking reasonably good with very little effort. And of course you can go back later and tweak things and make them prettier with CSS and so forth. But I get that date picker literally by putting in the word date picker. So that's kind of neat. And it knows what day it is, and when I click another day, it moves over the highlight, and there's an on-change event that's fired in the background that we can hook into, and we'll see that in a bit. But all of that happens pretty easily, and so that's pretty neat. And the only thing that we might wish for is we don't actually have access yet to the attributes that we may have entered data into in the edit, in the back end, in the WordPress editor. So, we put in this phrase, right? And there it is, right? But that's because the PHP file put it there. If I want to use it in these components for some reason, I'll have to get access to it. So that's our next step. We'll do that in the next segment.